But now I'm going to talk about procrastination. Or I'm going to procrastinate from that by talking about the inner critic. So, what we all need to know, and what I learned from memory research and now going into the research into creativity, shows that the brain in its very nature is creative. We are never not creative. Everything we experience in life, we color with our own experiences, expectations, dreams, and plans. And all this will make none of us will be objective or non-creative in just perceiving the world. That is the basic of brain science. So the brain is constructed to make stories, solve problems, even when we don't have one, like Einstein did when he presented the first relativity theory. That was the answer to a problem no one had ever asked him to solve. We love to connect the dots, and that is why conspiracy theories are so popular. We really love to connect dots, even when it's just craziness connecting those exact dots. Our memories are not only flawed, but we can remember things that never happened. And a lot of this happens in what in brain science is called DMN mode. I call it the daydream mode. It's a specific network in the brain where we just follow our own thoughts, our own train of thoughts. And in this state, research shows the most original ideas will occur. So being in your own thoughts, just wandering around, dooming, whistling, and thinking for no specific reason, that is where a lot of the creative gold is happening. So this DMN mode has been researched very thoroughly the last decade all over the world. It was discovered by a researcher called Marcus Rachel. And he tried to just find out what people were thinking when they said they were thinking of nothing. And he discovered that in this thinking of nothing mode, we are thinking a lot. Actually, half of the brain's capacity goes to this way of thinking about nothing. So it must be very important that we think of nothing. Since when our brains were shaped the way they are, we didn't live like this. You know, we couldn't go to a supermarket or anything. All our calories it was involved a lot of struggle in getting those calories, and the brain is needing a lot of calories. So 1/5 of the calories we're eating going to the brain, and half of that going to just think about nothing. It means that this think about nothing state, this daydream mode, this DMN, default mode network, is extremely important for us. And research has showed that this is where we consolidate memories, that memories are entering a long-term memory. We are investigating the relationship with ourselves and other people, understanding the kind of very advanced social behavior and networks that we are living in. Also, we're making predictions of the future. We can say that a lot of this is the basis for science fiction. We're all science fiction writers because we're using what we know about the past to predict the future, and also all these aha moments and ideas is appearing when we're in this daydream mode. But we got another system in the brain that we are engaging right now, and that is called the executive function. And that was discovered by a researcher called Alan Baddeley. And this executive function is about direction and to be focused. We're focused on the outward world. We're taking in a conversation or a lecture. We're learning something new. We're directing our attention outwards. It's the opposite of the daydream mode. So when we're in the executive function, we're using our temporal lobes, which are placed here. The executive function is all about the frontal lobe, calculating risk and consequences of what we do, getting memories that will be important for us right now, and also just kind of trying to keep the direction of what you're doing. It's both the frontal lobe and the temporal lobes. And the temporal lobes functions like, a horse that's been blinded on the sides here, not to be distracted from everything around it. So you got this, it's like you got, now I forgot the word, but it's supposed to block out insignificant noise, insignificant visual impressions, and like when you're in a cafe, right? And you're sitting at the cafe table. I know you all kind of don't remember how this is. Most of us have been in lockdown for a long time. But in a cafe, you shut out all the conversations around you and all the visuals from all the people around you, and you only focus on your friend and what she or he is saying, so that then you're using your temporal lobes very actively. And the same thing happens in the temporal lobe, that you block out all the strange ideas and leaps of thought that you do in the daydream mode. This is the important part. I'm going to come to the procrastination soon. So when you're very focused, you block out all the strange and weird ideas and thoughts. You block them out to be focused. But what you need when you're going to be creative is to not be focused and to follow your train of thoughts. So what happens when your temporal lobe is going down? I tried it. I crashed into a brick wall head first. I was on my bike and I didn't have a helmet on, and for a long time my head was just bursting with ideas. It's a writer, a neurologist called Alice Weaver Flaherty, that is this kind of exploring the meaning of the temporal lobe for creative work. And she wrote this book, The Midnight Disease, The Drive to Write, Writer's Block, and the Creative Brain. I can highly recommend it. And she describes also how a huge grief can throw you into this creative hyper state, where your brain is kind of bubbling with ideas and you cannot stop writing. You don't have to hit your head to get rid of your inner critic, the things that stop you from being creative. The inner critic is both this temporal lobe function, but it's also how you kind of connected to your social network and how you kind of have integrated what your friends think, what society thinks, what your parents think. You can safely assume that your parents is a big part of your inner critic, because your parents are usually they try to save you from running in front of a car or anything when you are a small child. So from the age of 5 or 6, you start developing the inner critic. You integrate what your parents says to you, so that you can be better at defending yourself and survive in the world. So it's also a survival mechanism. But just if we go into the temporal lobe part, you can put electricity through your temporal lobe. I've done that. It's very annoying and you cannot do it for long. And you have to have this big EKG helmet on to do that. But you also get into this state. You also get to shut down your temporal lobes if you do yoga nidra, which is the kind of most relaxing of all yoga, that all the forms of yoga. Or you can be resting, just resting, or you can try being very tired, and you will kind of recognize this, that when you're after a long day of being very concentrated, the minute you go to bed, your temporal lobes shut down and you start getting ideas, and you have to get your pen out and write them down. And that is because your temporal lobes are just exhausted, then you cannot stay concentrated for that long. So being tired is one way, kind of wear you yourself out is one way of make the temporal lobes shut down. So here is where procrastination enters. Of course, speed will also make the temporal lobes not work that well. You have to just get through to the deadline. You don't have to be perfect. So you will just do whatever you need to get to that deadline. Last year, I was supposed to write a book about loneliness. And that is the book I'm finishing now. Actually, I'm supposed to send the first draft to my editor today. So I procrastinated by saying yes to this talk. I was supposed to sit and write right now. And last year, I had so much anxiety writing this book. My inner critic was just strangling me. So instead of writing the loneliness book, I wrote this book. I wrote a book about body image and how to control the negative thoughts on your body. That was a procrastination strategy. I just needed to get out of this idea of writing the perfect book about loneliness. So now I used a lot of time writing this book. So that was good for me, because then my deadline suddenly grew very much shorter. So it's this philosopher called John Perry. He wrote a book called The Art of Procrastination. And I knew about this book, and I've written about it in this book about creativity. So I knew that I was onto something very smart by procrastination, by procrastinating. Because John Perry writes in this book, The Art of Procrastination, he writes about structured procrastination. And that means not scrolling on Instagram. It has to do with making a list of things you need to do. And you have to make them in a kind of prioritized order. And the most important things on top, of course, and then the less important. A true structured procrastinator will then work the list from the bottom up. So that is what I've done with this book on loneliness. I've been doing all the assignments I should do from the least important to the second important. And then in the end, I have a very short amount of time to write the loneliness book. And then I have to write it. And my inner critic just has to shut up, because it will not be perfect. It can't be. I got such a short deadline. So I just have to give up in front of my inner critic. So that is why procrastination can be such a creative drive. And the reason I kind of target Instagram now is that I love to procrastinate by being on Instagram, of course, but also since the things I discovered while writing the creativity book was that what we should never do is to give this too much of our precious time, because this is something completely different than reading a book. If you want to procrastinate and you have the choice between reading a book or being on this device, I will highly recommend reading the book, or just writing an article, or writing another book, or do something more productive than giving these companies that are earning money from our attention our time. The reason I can say this with such certainty is that, as I talked about before, the daydream mode is so important for our creative life. The daydream mode is the place where you get to know your inner voice. This is the place where you find out who you are in the world, in a connection with all the other people in your proximity. This is where you solidify your memories and create these visions and ideas for the future. And this device is both disturbing these long inner talk that you have with yourself. You're not having all these long thoughts going to the end of the road, kind of. You cannot do that when you're constantly disturbed by this thing. Also, this thing is disturbing your executive function. The executive function is your attention span, and it has to be trained. And this one, if you're in social media, it constantly feeds you new stimuli to keep you surfing. And that is destroying your ability to sit for a long time concentrating on something as important and rewarding as a book. And I'm in love with my phone. So this is not me being an anti-tech person. I'm such a tech fan, and it's so much information you can get from the internet. And I love that. But I just have to warn you, if you want to procrastinate, make this list of things you want to do and start with the least important and work your way to the top. If you're a procrastinator, a good procrastinator like me, that way you will kind of produce twice as much, and all the things you're doing will teach you something that you can bring into the huge and overwhelming task that you're trying to procrastinate yourself out of. So, done with the procrastination for me. I have to soon go back to writing my book, but first it will be time for some questions, I believe.
Yes, thank you so much, Hilde. We will open it for some questions to Hilde. So we have 10 minutes to do that. So we can write in the chat or write to us or Julie and me privately. I have a first question to kick off. So I really love what you're saying about the inner critic and procrastination. I actually haven't thought this through before we talked, that we can actually be procrastinating as a way to not deal with our inner critic. Do you have any other tips to shut out our inner critic without, as you have this strategy of doing the least important things first, and then we have to shut out our inner critic because there's no other way. But is there any other way that we can silence our inner critic?
Yes. Yes, the most important kind of the technique I'm describing is, of course, a little tiring. It involves a lot of work, and for me, that means that I haven't had one day off for 3 years, right? So I've been working day and night every weekend, all vacations. I haven't had a vacation. So this is a very tiring strategy that is not kind of in the long term. You cannot keep on doing that. Or you have to make the list a little bit shorter. So I'm trying to do that. But the hardest way of silencing your inner critic is one I describe in this Mageboka. It's the Big Belly book. It's about starting the hard work of self-love. And that involves also to befriend your inner critic, which means, and that is what I'm working on now, right? I'm trying to understand that my inner critic is there to protect me. It is my integration of all the people that try to take care of me and safeguard me in my childhood, and which I'm now using to safeguard myself too much. I'm safeguarding myself too much. So the moment you understand that the inner critic is just a kind of a little bit overcautious parent, and also for me, my inner critic is my dad, right? And my dad, what does he know? What does he know about the world today? So I kind of feel a little bit sorry for him now. I feel like you don't really know what you're talking about. I understand you try to protect me, but I know what is good for me. So it's a kind of a teenage rebellion going on in my head, freeing myself from this failed way of protecting myself. So the self-love path is a much longer path, but it's a much more long-term path, and it will give you much more, yeah, rest, and you will be happier. So it's a short-term technique is to become very tired, give yourself very short deadlines, procrastinate through doing a lot of other stuff. But long term is to be taking care of yourself. Try yoga. Yoga is a great way of enhancing the parasympathetic system in the body. The parasympathetic system is this system of non-stress. And the stress will increase your inner critic. You will be more targeted. You will be more in the executive function.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to kind of make your brain relax so you can go into daydreaming and have all these great ideas, you have to be in the parasympathetic mode, the relaxed mode.
Great, thank you. We are having some questions here. So Jennifer asks, how do dreams when you're asleep fit into this? Have you done some research regarding dreams?
Yeah, that's funny. I want to write a book about dreams sometime because the research is very new on that. Before we thought that dreams were a way of consolidating memories, that we went through our experiences and that made them stick to the memory. But that isn't the case. They don't know what dreams are anymore. It's been a lot of theories of what dreams are and what they do, but they don't know anymore. So it's a mystery. What we do know is that the dreamless sleep, the very heavy dreamless sleep, is the most important for brain function, because then we kind of flush through the brain. We got some things building up in our brain during the day, which is called tau. And this protein can collect in the brain, and then some researchers seems to think that this has to do with Alzheimer and the development of Alzheimer. But when you don't flush this through, the brain doesn't work properly. So this is my tip for you if you want to take care of your brain, is to sleep at least 7 or 8 hours a night, proper sleep. Eat kind of half healthy, not being fanatic about it, a little veggies, and then exercise 30 minutes a day. Nothing fanatical, the same thing as your doctor will tell you. This is general brain health and general body health.
Thank you. We have some questions, so I'm just going to jump into the other. Inga asks, how do you stop yourself from doing the things you know it's not good for you? Like, for example, scrolling on Instagram and other things.
It's extremely difficult just because these devices and these apps are made to engage us at all times. they are not constructed to give you peace because they don't earn money on that. So I'm totally an addictive person, so I have to be very careful. It's a good idea to just put it aside when you enter a room, you just, or your apartment, you put it in the hallway. Just put it away or just turn it completely off. But this is like most addictive behavior. It's extremely complicated, and I cannot give the simple answer is just turn it off. But you don't do that because you don't want to do it when it comes down to it. So I'm just struggling with that myself. Actually, you have to turn off all notification. I would highly recommend watching the movie The Social Dilemma if you haven't done it yet. And all the kind of former executives of all these, like Instagram and Facebook, and these are top people. They don't give it to their children. And they recommend turning off all notifications for all the apps that you have on your machine. In my book on creativity, I also talk to one of the top programmers in Norway or in the world. He's kind of a top figure. And I'm talking about, I talk to him about the internet and how it enhances or decreases creativity.
Okay, so I know they're running out, but Justina, hi Justina, thank you for joining us. She's having a question here. Hilde, have you heard of the course of The Artist Way by Juliet Cameron? And if yes, what do you think of it?
I have heard of it and I haven't tried it. My approach to creativity is through brain science.
And also she says, where does the fear come into this? I heard the other day that underlying cause of procrastination is the fear of failure or success, actually.
Yes. As I mentioned, the procrastination is a way of avoiding delivering the perfect result. So it's the fear of not being perfect that in the end make you procrastinate to avoid being held accountable to perfect. So when you procrastinated enough and you have so little time finishing, you don't have to deliver perfect, right? So it's the fear of perfect that makes you procrastinate.